All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. This is our, I believe, third or fourth official alumni chat. And today we have 3 alumni who are also facilitators for UX Academy. So that's awesome. For those who are part of UXA, welcome. These will be your facilitators during the course of your program. And if you are not part of UXA, feel free to get to know them as well. Maybe they can help give you some insight as to, what the journey's like in UXA, what it's like after UXA, all of that fun stuff. I'm Emily. I am the community manager for Designlab, and then I'm going to let my team introduce themselves in a little bit. But feel free to say hello in the chat. Let us know where you're from, if you are in Designlab, which cohort you're in, and then if you have questions, toss the questions in the questions tab. And what's going to happen is I'm going to kick us off with. We're going to have my team do a round of introductions. We're going to start off with some starter questions, and then based on what you guys hear, then we'll kind of answer your questions in the order we get them, or based on upvotes. So if there's a question you like, upvote those questions so that way we know that we should get to answer them. We are slotted for 90 minutes, but I don't anticipate that we will go that long, pending all the questions that we get. So regardless, if we do hit the hour mark, that is where we will cut off questions, and then we will spend the rest of the time trying to go through the rest of the questions, and then we will wrap up. But yeah, I'm going to let my team take over, and let's start with Jay. You want to say hello? Introduce yourself.
Cool. Well, hello, everybody. Good to meet you guys. My name is Jay. I was part of the Eves cohort, graduated last April. Currently, I am a product designer at Thankview. So a lot of the stuff I do now is like, designing things, but also thinking about the business impact. So how do we help the business grow, and how do we help it, our sales team succeed with the products that we're building out?
Sweet. And then next we have Lara.
Hi, I'm Lara, and I'm an alum of the CARE cohort, which I don't know how long ago it was. It was like a few years now. And I currently work as a design manager, and prior to doing Designlab, I was working in academia.
Awesome. And we have Suzy.
Hi, everyone. Suzy here from Oakland, California. I was in the Clarendon cohort, which I guess was a little over a year ago. And I'm a UX designer at an agency called Blue River.
Awesome. And like I said, I'm Emily. I am the community manager, but I am also an alumni. I'm from the Disney cohort, which was 4 years ago, a long time ago. So I've been here for quite a while. So yes, hello, welcome everyone. So we're going to kick it off with questions. My team here has briefly mentioned, what they currently do and what they were doing. So I guess the follow-up question is, what made you all interested in pursuing UX? It's a hot question.
Should we go in the same order we went through?
Yeah, whoever wants to go.
Sure. No, I guess I'll go then. Yeah. So for me, I didn't get too much of a background. So I started in a business and sales position way back in the day. I was working there, it was sort of like a job I fell into after college, and it kind of felt like, I should always just stick with it, just because I had studied, economics for 4 years, and it just kind of felt the right path. But as I was doing the business side of things, I've always really been very creative. I always tried to build tools. I've always liked the design thing, aspect of a lot of things. And for me, it's just when I would try to do those at work, sometimes they would be like, you should probably focus a little bit more on what you're doing now. So it wasn't really allowed to let that grow. And it's just I think a year and a half ago, something hit me, and it's I need to leave my job. I need to do something different. So that was kind of there was just a moment where it hit me, I really didn't enjoy what I was doing, and I wanted to do something different that was creative, but also analytical at the same time. So UX kind of seemed like the perfect choice for me, and I'm kind of going that direction.
And let's see, I was working in academia. I have a doctorate in anthropology and also a background in art, making art. And I loved it. I loved what I was doing. But to do those two things meant that I was basically bouncing around the country from fellowship to fellowship. So I was living in different cities, basically a year or two at a time, which was awesome for a time. And then I decided I wanted something a little bit more stable where I could maybe choose where I was going to live. And academia wasn't really somewhere where I could choose, I want to live in this city and then go and live there. It was, wherever a job was, I would have to move there. And I was already kind of doing work that was like UX, kind of combining anthropology and art together, doing research and creative things. And then I have a project called Mapping Arts Project. It's a little bit dormant online right now, but I was working on it a lot back then. And where I was working on that, pretty much doing UX before I knew really what UX design was. And based on that, just kind of trying to analyze, like, what is it I like about what I'm doing right now, and what do I want to be doing more of in the future? And deciding that if I was going to kind of try to make that my full-time work, then UX seemed like a good field for me. And another big thing for me was I really wanted to work with a team. And academia is very solo-oriented. It's all about like you as an individual and like what you're doing by yourself. And I really like, and at the time I didn't know if this was really going to work out, but it seemed like UX is very collaborative and I could work with a team. And that definitely is the case. I do work really closely with my team to build something. And I think that was a big draw for me too.
Well, I have a pretty varied background, but my background also is in anthropology and communications. So I was doing a lot of freelancing, research, and writing for academic institutions, as well as just a lot of freelance on the side. I was also working for an education company doing their communications and marketing, and working with designers and subject matter experts, and realized that during my time there as primarily marketer, project manager, that I was also pretty good at the visual design side. So I was working very closely with the designers there, the visual designers there, who were not UX designers, but more on the graphic design side, and helping them implement some tools for students online. And that was kind of my first foray into actually, it was design production, but really exploring UX design as a field. And so that's kind of how I like to say I grew into the role. I always feel like I use a lot of my combination of past experiences in my current role right now. But I also knew that I wanted something a little bit more focused on the research side, implementing the visual side, as well as flexibility was very important to me in terms of location and hours, and UX design provided that.
Yep. Awesome. So this is a hot question because we have a lot of folks who switch into UX, as we all know. What is, I guess, one piece of advice for someone who doesn't have any previous design experience, who's looking to transition to UX? Like, what's a piece of advice you would give them?
Practice like crazy. Like, a lot of it is like you just have to keep doing it again and again. I remember when I was learning Sketch, just practicing like over and over, like learning all the shortcuts, learning all the keys. I'm a notoriously lazy designer. Like, I don't want to do more work than I need to. So like learning something like symbols, for example, is like a really good way to simplify your work, but also make you really, really productive, and then just make you work so much faster. So looking for kind of shortcuts or looking for ways to kind of really better yourself as well can just be helpful. Because when you're looking for those shortcuts, learning for faster ways, in a weird kind of like circular way, you're learning the whole process. It's like, all right, like this is everything about it. Here's a fast way to do it because I know everything else works behind it. But yeah, just like, I mean, I didn't come from a visual background either. Like, I dabbled in like Photoshop when I was in middle school and like high school. But beyond that, I didn't have anything professional. It was all like kind of self-taught. And yeah, just do it again and again. Like, recreate something that you really like. If there's a website that you really like if you really think like Instagram is a cool model, try building out Instagram like what it would look like just through Sketch or through Figma, or just try designing something that you really wanted to be like randomly designed. And that'll kind of like, if you design something you're passionate about, it'll just make it more fun. It just becomes more like a challenge versus like just work.
I think drawing, like if you have no experience in design, I think what's really, and I've said this a lot in our group crits, what's really awesome about design is that it uses so much of people's past experiences. So no matter what, I mean, most of the people who are doing Designlab have really varied experiences that they're bringing with them, whether that's like just from their life or from past jobs. And that experience matters so much in design. And I think, to me, that's one of the things that makes UX design such an interesting field, because people do have all these really varied experiences. And so look for that and how you can build on that. Like Jay, you know, with like a business background and like really drawing on that. or like with Suzy and I, like having an anthropology background and really drawing on that, like, okay, we feel strong in research. And so like, how can I use that in UX design and then build this other skills that I want to learn? Because I think most of the students that I've met in Designlab aren't coming from like zero, like they have experience in something. It just might not be like all the parts of UX design. And then other thing kind of related, Jay, to what you were saying, like if you see something that you like, and I think with that, it's just like observe everything. If you're moving into UX design, every app that you use, every website you go to, everything becomes a learning opportunity. And so I think like if there's something that you see that's working really well, take a screenshot, write down what you think is like working well about that. If you see something that's horrible, take a screenshot of that and like put a note that like you don't want to do that in the future. And that's for like everything from like research. Like if I get an email from a company and I think like, oh, that was a really nice way to ask me to do UX research, you know, take a screenshot of that and I catalog it so that if I need to send out an email for UX research, I can refer to it in the future.
Suzy's frozen. Quite possibly. It's okay. We will get back.
It looks like she froze.
It's okay.
But
We will get back to her.
One thing I want to really echo a lot is Lara's statement just about like you coming in with not with zero. So you have a lot of soft skills that you bring with you that are really going to be vital when you start like working as a UX designer. So like one of the things I do all the time now is communication. Like you got to be able to talk to your team. You got to be able to like understand how people work and like, you know, what is the best way to work with them, right? So take that skill that you have before and carry it over. Like it's not like just because you're going to UX that you can forget everything that you learned before in your previous jobs. It's how can I take all those experiences, everything that I've learned and everything that I can do and really use that to my advantage. You know, like that's your selling point. Like in addition to like learning the fundamentals of UX design, you now are coming in with a lot of skills that you can carry to bring to the team. So if it is something like business side, for example, like you know the business side of things, that's great. You can talk to stakeholders, like you can talk to people who are in the sales and marketing side. You empathize with what they're like, what are the challenges that they have. And as a designer now, you can kind of really help emphasize and make those things a priority when you design those.
Yep, and I'll fill in a little bit as well. So I came from support and retail. So, and all of that is just learning how to talk to people, learning how to interact with people. And that alone is a huge part of the job. You will have to interact with project managers, developers, salespeople, account managers. There's almost like no one that you wouldn't interact with like on your job. Like that, I feel like that's what I enjoy so much about being a UX designer is that I actually get to touch so many departments. I get to touch so many areas of the business where everyone else is typically siloed. And I feel like I'm just so nosy. Like I want to know everything. So I feel like that's why like this is like the perfect job for me. But cool. All right. We have Suzy back.
Sorry there.
That's okay. It's your turn. Yeah.
Were we still talking about tips for
Yes.
people who don't have a design background? So I guess for visual design, I would say tutorials, whether on YouTube, subscribing to YouTube, to designers or companies that put on those types of videos. Also, Instagram is a great resource for quick bites if you're just kind of like on the train or commuting or whatever. Like UI Gradient is an account that puts out some great visual stuff. Application, so recreating what you see, maybe just as an exercise, just trying to actually recreate some UI or a visual mock-up, using those applied tutorials, tips from those tutorials, just doing that as much as possible, and you'll start to learn what tools and shortcuts are helpful for you and what you need to, what you learn as you do that. Also, just understanding your strengths and weaknesses. So this kind of applies to UX as a whole outside of just UI, but understanding your strengths, what lends yourself to become a good UX designer, and identify those weaknesses and really try to pinpoint what you can continue working on outside of the curriculum. So not just relying on the curriculum, but doing your own stuff, networking, talking to people, tutorials, all of that good stuff. Yeah, so I guess really those are the things, and echoing what was said, that, you know, what Lara was saying, your combination of past experiences can really lend itself to UX because it's such a holistic practice. So don't let it be intimidating when you're starting out or applying and seeing like X number of years of experience. I think that that's just what is put out there to try and weed out people, but I definitely applied to positions where I didn't meet that criteria and I was hired. So I think once they speak to you and realize, you know, that you have other skills that lend itself to the actual role, they'd be willing to give you a chance.
100%. I support that and back that fully. I've also gotten positions where the feedback that was given was purely because like they hired me because of my passion and my energy for wanting to do the job. So like, I always say like that is probably 50% of the interview of like getting them to consider you. It's not just about your portfolio. It's not just about the boxes that you can check. It's about you and your personality for sure. All right, so I guess we have two related questions, but this one is from Joanne. She's one of our other facilitators as well. She is in the crowd today, but she's asking, would love to know about your experiences with imposter syndrome, maybe at the beginning of your career or even now, and what sort of things do you do to overcome it?
Am I starting first, or I got right? Man, imposter syndrome. Honestly, I suffer this constantly. But I think in a way I sort of use that to my, in a weird way, I try to turn it into like a strength of mine, right? So like, not being an imposter is a strength, but like, I think it's a sort of like, how can I be better? How can I learn more? How can I achieve more? I think one of the things about being a good UX designer is the striving for more knowledge and to be better and like always improve. Like UX is a field that is constantly being redefined. There isn't just like a one set standard and it'll work for 50 years. Like next year, like we may have a whole new set of rules that we need to play by, and you have to kind of be able to adapt and learn those things. So in a way, like imposter syndrome is terrifying. It's just kind of like, man, I didn't do enough. I don't have enough skills. But it's like, all right, like instead of thinking like just kind of like using that as like a fear, use that as motivation. Into like, it's like, all right, like I don't know like I don't understand this. Like I don't understand accessibility. What resources can I do to understand it more? How can I practice being like designing more accessible? So you sort of like turning that fear into a motivation has helped me a lot, and hopefully it'll help you too. But it's like one of those things that you're constantly going through, and I think if you don't feel imposter syndrome, that's ironically the true imposter. Like, you know, like it's if you don't feel like you don't know enough, then you probably don't know anything. So
those are good. Those are good tips. I think a couple things like knowing your strengths, and so like knowing, maybe there are some things that like you really do feel good at. Maybe it's from those past experiences or something like that, and so kind of it's not like you don't know anything, but maybe like there's something. I think the accessibility example is a good one, and so you could like learn about that, but also kind of using your strengths to balance out some areas where you don't feel as strong. And then if you do get to work with a team, like in a job, for instance, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, what am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing at all. Rely on your team and show work early, which I know might be very hard if you're kind of like, well, this isn't good enough. But interestingly, like if you show work earlier, and we always encourage it in Designlab, so hopefully that's a skill that people are practicing, like not holding on to your work until it's like so precious that like every critique feels like a dig. But like show it really early, like show it when it's really messy so that it is just really messy and it's not supposed to be perfect. And then getting the feedback from there and like building and knowing that design is iterative and the point is to constantly make it better. So you don't need to hold on to something until it's like totally perfect, which seems like that would lead to more imposter syndrome and just like more of the uneasy feelings of like, this isn't good enough. Also because you're like holding on to it for so long.
Yeah, I think that this is something that every designer feels, imposter syndrome. And I've talked to designers. I had a friend who was head of design at Google, and he tells me to this day, I still have imposter syndrome. So I think that's just a normal thing because the field is constantly changing. There's new technology, there's new tools available. You have to be quick on your feet. You have to constantly be learning. And there's no way that one person can do all of everything. And I think that as you start to pursue your career and your journey, you will find your niche. You will understand what you gravitate towards and what gives you energy and what you really are passionate about. And then alongside that, you also understand, okay, these are the things that are not in my wheelhouse necessarily, but something I'm interested in learning more about, and constantly taking those courses and learning on the side outside of your job with a curriculum. That will always be happening. But I think as you go through your journey, you'll also identify the things that you really don't care about so much, the things that you do kind of care about, it's not necessarily in your wheelhouse and you want to improve, and then also knowing what you truly do or gravitate or specialize in, or what you're very good at. So those are kind of 3 buckets I feel like we're constantly negotiating as we're like pursuing new jobs or entering, you know, a new position or starting new projects. As someone who's working in an agency, I get tons of different types of projects that I work on, and they're really challenging because not one project is the same. So I think that this is just going to be, you know, this is a very common feeling among all designers at huge agencies and senior and leadership positions. It's just a normal thing because it's like I said, it's a holistic field. There's so much to learn, and it's changing very quickly. So echoing also what everyone said, relying on your team and knowing what gives you energy and what you can improve upon.
Yeah, and I completely echo what Jay said about using that as your motivation. Like I 100% say that all the time. Like don't let it get you down, because it will get you down if you let it get you down, but use it instead to drive you to always want to do better. And I feel like for me, as someone who's never satisfied with anything, like I feel like that is why I personally get imposter syndrome, because I feel like I could always be better, because I always think everything else can be better. So just know that you are not alone. And like Suzy said, you could be head of Google design and it wouldn't matter. Like there's always going to be things that you want to improve, and part of that is always going to be wanting to improve yourself. So
yeah, and I wanted to mention one other thing with that, which is that it's okay to admit that you don't know something. So if you're in a client or stakeholder meeting and they bring up something, it's okay to say, you know, I don't really know, and I'll get back to you on that, or I have to check in with my team. This is not my specialty. So I kind of focus on this more rather than this. So I think it's good to be transparent.
that is actually an Apple tactic.
100% echo that. Like I made that mistake when I was in business. I would tell people things that I didn't know and they were right, and they would hold you to that. So if it turns out it's not right, that's not good. Also, it's just like, it's good to acknowledge like, hey, like I don't know this, but also talk about the steps. Like, what are you doing to learn it? So like, if you don't know it or you don't have this information, what will you do to get that information? So sorry to jump into you, Emily.
No. I was just saying that's an Apple tactic, actually, to admit that you don't know something, because it actually then expresses that you're willing and you're open-minded enough to want to learn something that's different or something new. And that kind of echoes all the sentiment here. Like UX is constantly changing. So like really the only way to be successful is to admit that you don't know everything, but you're willing to go learn this other thing. Cool. Yeah. So I feel like we actually already answered Laura's question about one piece of advice to kind of level up your skills if you're already a designer, but is there anything else you'd like to throw in, you know, that maybe we didn't mention?
Something I always tell learning. Continue learning.
Yeah, just continue
something
learning.
I always tell this. Nope, sorry, go for it. I don't want to interrupt you.
That was it. Pretty short. Just continue learning. You know, webinars, whatever. It's like a constant process.
Yeah, something that I tell the students in my group crits is to network constantly. Like, you know, like everybody here has kind of talked about it, but it really, like, that will set you apart from everybody else. Like it's, you know, knowing people in the industry, like just familiarizing yourselves with like some of the terms, what people are looking for, what is in a good teammate, and even if UX is a good fit for you, like networking really helps you just get your foot in the door. Like if you don't talk to anybody, you just apply to jobs, like you are just another number. Like you are one of like 500 people who applied, right? But if you talk to somebody, you get to know them a little bit and like put your name out there and talk like, hey, like what do you like in a designer? What are some good things to have? You all of a sudden you're not number one or number two. You're like, oh, like you have a name. You have like, this is your background. They know a little bit about you. And you all of a sudden, you kind of put it on top of the pile. You're in consideration. So that like, don't network for the sake of like, I want to get a job, but network just to learn more about the industry. Network to cut better your skills and see what else you can learn to be a better designer and advance your UI UX skills.
100%. All right, we're switching gears to talking about the program. And Sue is asking, which track did you take? Were you part-time or full-time? And how was it for you to balance your time? So we love to talk about time management, and Sue is working full-time on the side as well.
I'll let you guys go first. I've been talking a lot.
I can go since I'm last. I'll just make this.
Yes. Reverse it.
Let's see. So I was full-time and working, and that was insane. I thought I could do that. And then I ended up reducing my hours to part-time and continuing. So working part-time and going to Designlab full-time. And then that was still insane. So I ended up quitting my job and then also leveling down to part-time with the curriculum, just because I really wanted to give my full attention to the curriculum. And I felt like full-time was doable, but I just wanted to spend more time on the projects because I knew that this would be what I would feature in my portfolio. And I wanted a really good foundation and starting point to be able to also have time to network and do my other design education on the side.
Yeah, I did part-time as well, and I was working full-time. One thing that I did was one of the capstones that I did was actually related to my job at the time, which was great because then there was overlap. And so it was still long hours though. I mean, I was still waking up, 6 a.m. and working all the way through 9, 10 p.m. But the part-time felt right for me because then I could just take more of my time. I mean, it's still fast, but take time where I think, like Suzy said too, and what Jay was talking about, networking. I was living in Denver at the time, and we could see people in person, and so I was actually going out to lots and lots of events. And what was great was that with part-time and kind of the overlap with my job and Designlab part-time, I still had time where I didn't feel like I could only just be like locked away in my apartment. I could actually get out and go to meet other designers, and that was a really, really important part of learning and just starting to be in the UX field.
So I did full-time. I dipped from my job real quick. I was like, opportunity, like to go to full UX, let's do it. For me, it was like, I knew that if I did part-time, like this is just my own self. This isn't to speak about anybody else's experience or like what they're capable of. But knowing myself, like I wouldn't be able to focus on both things because my job was already like really demanding. There's a lot of stuff to do, and most of my time would have been dedicated there. And I think UX kind of would have been an afterthought. And for me, it was like I really wanted to do UX. I didn't want to put it off any longer. So I was like, for me, like full-time made the most sense just to really focus 100% of my attention just working on UX. And I think it was really great because it allowed me just like my whole mindset was just thinking about design. Like I would eat, sleep, and drink design. Like that was just my life at the time. And that sounds kind of like scary to some people, but like I was really passionate about it. I really liked what I was doing. So it's like, it didn't seem like I was just like working all day. It's like, oh, I want to explore some websites. I want to do some stuff. I want to practice like learning Sketch. Like that was just kind of my day. And like that, like if I was part-time, it probably would have been really tough because I would have just like thinking about work stuff. But being full-time allowed me just to focus 100% just on that.
Yeah, and I did the program part-time and I work full-time as well, so same as Lara. And my typical day during the week, so my normal day would start at 9, I would get to the office at 7, and every day for 2 hours in the morning, I would do some design work there. I took all of Saturday off because that was like my break day. Always give yourself a break. Always make sure you take a break. And then Sunday was like my day of doing like 10 to 16 hours of design work. So that's me. I like to work under pressure.
I remember that.
Yeah, I love to work last minute. So that's just how I am. But in terms of my advice for time management, because if you are early in the program, try every tactic you could possibly think of now. Some people like to work in large chunks. Some people need to work in shorter chunks with multiple breaks layered through. So try it all. Like I said, I'm someone who just puts everything to the last minute. So I have no choice but to do all 16 hours at once. But don't do that unless you can. But yeah, so I don't know. Before we move on to the next question, any other tips about time management that we'd like to pass on?
Take care of yourself. Your mental health is very important.
Yes.
Sorry, Larry, I saw you unmuted, so I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about like taking a break, I think is a really good point. Like it might seem in the beginning, like especially like you're super excited to get started and I know that sometimes also like with some things, like you're waiting for someone to like look at some work or something like that. And it's like really exciting in the beginning, which, you know, hopefully it is. And then, but balance throughout, like to keep up the momentum is important. And then like knowing what to do during those times when maybe like you really have done all you can do on like your mid-fidelity wireframes, and you're like really waiting and you kind of don't want to move on because every change you just need some feedback. Maybe that's the time when you can say like, okay, I haven't taken a break or like gone for a walk or talked to my friends or my family or something like that. And so, you know, make sure that you're doing those things too. And I did make it a point to like take weekends off. So I'm not a last minute person. I really like to like plan out like when I think I'm going to do all my work. And it was more important for me to like have the weekends to do other things. And then like, you know, actually work late at night on design things. And it was okay. It was fun. I wanted to be doing it, and it wasn't a burden. Like it was great. It was fun to be learning new things and to be thinking about changing my career in this way.
Yeah, and I think everyone has a different methodology that works for them, like the Pomodoro technique that never worked for me. But I think, you know, structure and a schedule is important. And if you can stick to that, that's good. I also think it's good to just, aside from taking a break, like taking care of yourself, take a break from the work, because sometimes you're so fixated on something and you're stuck or you're roadblocked. And actually, if you just take a 15-minute walk and come back, you can just see it with a fresh pair of eyes. And I will say, take those regular breaks. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would say like if you don't take a break and you just like constantly try to power through things, you're gonna burn out really quickly. I saw that's the worst thing that can happen. Like, I think it's like one of the things I'd want to like recommend his advice is like UX is exciting. It's like a really cool field to be in. Like it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. Like, but if you burn yourself out, you're not gonna enjoy it. It's just gonna be like, oh, it's just you're just kind of slogging through it, and like kind of just getting things done to get things done. Like as a result, your work is gonna be pretty subpar. But you know, knowing when to take a break and take care of your mental health and your physical health is always really important. Like it's okay to acknowledge like, hey, like I need to take a little bit of a break, or I need to kind of like, you know, focus my attention somewhere else. And I think that'll just like, that's not like going backwards at all. That's just kind of like, all right, like you're kind of stopping a little bit, you're like kind of refreshing your mind, you're focusing a little bit somewhere else, and then you come back refreshed and ready to go again. And you kind of like, I feel like your work is just gonna be so much better. And also like what's really cool about that is like doing other activities can also help stimulate your mind in other ways. Like, oh, like sometimes an idea will just pop in your head, like, oh, I didn't think about that. And then you can just apply that idea to whatever you're designing. Like if you're just always in design mode, you end up in tunnel vision, and you just kind of like, oh, I only look at one solution. Versus you take yourself out of that a little bit, you're able to kind of explore other options, and like things in a normal life can help influence those designs as well.
Spot on. All right, we are gonna jump all over the place and answer questions in the order they came in. So get ready. So, what was the most challenging thing about the job search, and what were some things you all did that helped? I think for me, really quickly, something I like to tell students, if you are very curious, because I know especially when you start, you're very excited, you're very anxious to actually learn about, you know, the job opportunities that are available to you. Do that. Start with that. Start by actually researching job requirement, you know, or like job postings that are in your area or areas that you would like to be in. Study them, because they're all gonna be written differently, and a lot of times, like, I feel like recruiters sometimes just put in a lot of information in there about what's required, but it's usually not. So, but either way, study it. Like study what, you know, certain jobs in certain areas are asking for, you know, and then also compare like across titles. Like if a job in San Francisco and a job here in San Diego are both listed as UX designer, chances are those job descriptions look very different. I feel like UX like is more well known in San Francisco and actually better understood than it is down here in San Diego. So that's what I always say. Just start by studying all of these job postings, and then that should give you an idea of like, okay, this is what an area that I should focus on. This is an area I should work on, stuff like that.
I think one of the things for me was like identifying really where I wanted to be, what kind of company and would I like it. And there was one point where I was moving forward in an interview process with a company, and I just didn't like it that much. Like I didn't like the company, but I was like excited about a job. And it was actually, I talked to my mentor, which was great. And I told her, like, I don't know, I feel like I should just continue in the process because, like, they want me to, but I don't like the job. And she, encouraged me that I don't, there's going to be other jobs, and that if I take that job, then I won't have the time, the opportunity to pursue other jobs. And that seems really obvious, like, to say it now, but when you're, for the most part, since I was, I don't know, a teenager, I've had a job. And so to all of a sudden, like, not have a job, and actually that wasn't really true. I took a part-time job after I finished Designlab because I couldn't just, like, not have any job. But it was like, I thought I should just, like, take the first opportunity that came my way. And instead, I think it was great to bounce that against her advice, and to say no. Like, I wasn't interested in continuing in the process because I just wasn't interested in the company anymore after the first round of interviews. And I think it's really important to know what you want. And sometimes that does mean, like, starting in the interview process. And if you are clear about what you want, what you don't want, then when you're in the interview process, if it starts to seem like something you're not really interested in, it's also okay to back out of it and to say, like, thanks so much for your time. I think this isn't really a good fit for me, but, thanks for the opportunity, and to then put your time into something else that's going to be more in line with what you want. And so I think really taking the time to think about what it is that you want. What do you want to do all day? What kind of people do you want to work with? What kind of company do you want to work for? And getting those things together for yourself before starting the job search. And I think looking at job descriptions from all over can give you a good sense of that. And that's also where the networking comes into play, because you can just ask people, like, what's their day like, and what do they actually do all day? Maybe someone, like, at different companies, and talk to them about it. Like, what's the culture like? Because it's going to be where you spend a lot of time. So it has to be a good fit.
Yeah, I would say the hardest thing looking for a job at just graduating and then starting to look for a design position is the fact that I didn't come from a formal design background, and then coming to boot camp and then trying to get hired, especially in the Bay Area where it's extremely competitive. There just weren't a lot of opportunities for entry-level designers and junior designers. And what's funny is, like I said, I started to apply to jobs that where I didn't meet, for instance, the number of years specifications as a designer. But as I started talking to people, and as I was really spending the time to identify, my story, why I was interested in design in the first place, what excited me about design, what were my strengths, I realized that, and especially as I was talking to other designers, that I could provide a lot of value that people weren't necessarily seeing, hiring managers weren't necessarily seeing in terms of just like a paper trail or a track record. So that's why I keep emphasizing your combination of past experiences can really lend yourself to the role that you want to be in UX. And again, that means really taking the time to write down and identify your strengths, your weaknesses, as Lara was saying, what type of environment you want to be in, whether it's thinking about team size. There were a lot of interviews where I went in and understood that I would be the only sole designer. Do I want to be collaborating, or do I want to be the sole designer? Do you want to have mentorship opportunities? So what does that team structure look like? What does leadership look like? What type of sector do you want to work in? What type of industry, startup, agency, product design, UX, what exactly excites you about design? I think people really have to sit down, write it out, think about it, and really kind of stew upon what is it that got you into design in the first place? What would you be happy doing? What type of environment would make you happy? So that's just, I think, really spending time thinking about those passions of mine and what really drew me to UX, and also understanding what I was already good at and leveraging my existing skills to be able to show that I could add a lot of value to the company. Know your worth, know what value you can bring to the company, craft that story. And I think that, everyone will say, think of your elevator pitch. If you had just like, especially if you're networking, what is within under a minute, what you can say to someone about why you're pursuing design, make it a compelling story. And we talk about stories in terms of, talking about case studies, talking about even pitching to clients. Storytelling is really important, and I think it's good to try and understand your story. So the hardest part, yes, I think is the first hurdle is getting your first job. I think that is the biggest hurdle. Once you get that first job, even if that's by way of freelancing or like temporary positions, that will greatly leverage your chances and opportunities to get to that next gig.
So for me, there's two things that were pretty big challenges. The first one, this is a full-time problem only, but burning through your funds very quickly. I burned through my savings very fast. I didn't realize how fast it was, especially living in New York City. Like, this seems like a very non-design thing, but like really, like, kind of be careful of it, be mindful of it, because like the last thing you want is another hurdle to try to overcome while you're trying to like do one other thing, right? So definitely just be mindful of that. Now, the second one I think was really hard for me is like selling yourself. Like, I think Suzy mentioned this a little bit as well, working an elevator pitch. Like for me, like, when you're in an interview, like I have a really hard time talking about myself and like talking like in a way like, oh my God, I'm so amazing, I can do all these cool things, right? Like you want to seem humble, but you also want to seem really like you are this amazing designer, like they would miss out on hiring, right? So a lot of it is just like, how do you kind of find that good balance? So really just a lot of practice, like just doing it again and again. Talk to your friends about it, like pitch you to them, right? And see if they're interested at all. Like it needs to be compelling to everybody. Like you could have different pitches. You could have one to other designers. You could have one to like salespeople, one to developers. But basically, you want to be able to refine it down to like, what is your worth? Like, what can you do for them? Like, what can you provide them? Like, I think that is really like the biggest thing about all this. Like, you're learning all these skills, but like, show me what you can do. Show me what you can offer us. And like, just working on that is a tough challenge, but I'll just so much that what everyone's saying, practice again and again and again, and just kind of get better at it.
Absolutely. Okay, switching over to tools. And this is, I feel like we can probably answer this in two parts. So do you need to know both Sketch and Figma at an expert level? So I'm assuming that's for the job, but I guess also related to UX, like do you need to know both? And then personal preference or just opinions, do you think it's better to focus on one or the other? I like Sketch because I have just not switched over to Figma. And I'm also just terrified of if the internet goes down or if the server goes down and I can't access my work, that's what terrifies me. So that's why I stick with Sketch. Literally the only reason. But Figma, I think, is a much stronger application, in my opinion, because of that collaboration aspect. The fact that you can share your work very easily with other people and collaborate with others. I think it is a much stronger program. But in general, like, just because I'm just so worried of losing anything, like I just need to have my work on my local machine.
Oh, Lara, did you want to go? I have not used Figma because when I was in the curriculum, I used Sketch, and I started to notice as I started with my agency and all the designers also use Sketch that more and more of students were starting to use Figma, and I'm talking about the students that were in my crits. So I was curious about exploring Figma, and I also consulted with other companies where their designers use Figma, and I was able to see how powerful it is, especially for collaboration. I think that it's going to probably, I think that Figma will probably start to outdo Sketch. Actually, there's a video I saw that AJ and Smart did on analyzing Sketch and Figma and the pros and cons. I think what Emily was saying regarding not having it actually on your computer, so relying on web-based platform can be tricky. But I think in terms of collaboration and a lot of the other powerful tools that Figma has, I think it's probably leaning towards that direction. But from what I understand, if you are a Sketch user, you can transition to Figma pretty quickly. So I wouldn't get too hung up on that. I would try to learn as many tools as possible, especially the industry standard tools, which I think right now we're at Figma and Sketch.
Yeah, I think building off that, I think it's good to get familiarity with all the tools that you can. And then, using the one that you feel comfortable in, knowing that if you work at a company and they use something else, you're going to learn that one. We use Sketch, and it's because when I joined a company, they were they kind of really didn't have a full-time designer, and I was using Sketch, and so we use Sketch, and it becomes hard to change tools within a company. So we also were like, maybe we should use Figma. Like, we could actually not have so many steps to like our design file management, because right now it's like we have to be pretty much like in lockstep. We have a great system and it works really well, but the online collaboration piece would definitely be great in Figma. But to make the change with a company, it just involves a lot of bureaucratic steps. It's not as easy as just like when you start and say like, let's use Sketch. If you want to switch to Figma, that was just like a whole conversation. And so far, it just hasn't so outweighed, like the pros haven't so outweighed what we already do have in Sketch, and our file management works well. And we use Envision for prototyping, which then works really well with Maze, which we do use for some remote usability testing. And so it's working. But I do think that during the Designlab course is a great time to try out different tools, because like for one capstone, you can use Sketch, and then like another capstone, you can use Figma, and then when you're interviewing for jobs, you can say, I feel comfortable in both Sketch and Figma, and that's great, because usually you're not going to get to choose which tool you're using unless you're doing like freelance work.
I would say learn one of them, get really, really good at it. The other one will come very easily. Like, you can probably learn the other one in like less than a week. For the most part, the programs are pretty similar. Like, the only differences would be like shortcuts, naming conventions. So like, instead of called the symbol, it's called a component in Figma. A little couple like changes with like how responsive works. But for the most part, or like in plugins as well. But for the most part, they do the same thing. They're very easy to like. You can adapt it very quickly. So I think instead of trying to spread yourself too thin to like learn like 5 different tools, really, really good at like Sketch or Figma. And then like if you have like spend a little bit of time and learn something else, like if you are like have some project, like maybe try capstone 2 or 3 in the other program and kind of see how that works and kind of find out what works for you. But like Lara mentioned, like it's really hard to get a team to switch entirely, because that means like changing process, doing like a bunch of readjustments. If you have a design library, like that's just like readjusting everything. So it can be a little bit tough there. But in terms of like personal use and personal learning, just really master one of them, and then the other one will come to you.
Totes. All right, switching over to everyone's second favorite topic, other than imposter syndrome, is portfolios. So what would your advice be about building and presenting a portfolio? I feel like it's like a trick question all the time.
I think they're tough. I think portfolios are hard. They're not easy to build. They are time consuming, but it is the first thing that hiring managers or recruiter is looking at. And so it's your first foot in the door. And so they are really important. And I think Designlab has great tips and things along the way to like get things ready. I think how other people look at it, and whether that's in a group crit or like send it out to other people. Even actually in a group crit, you're probably not going to get to look at the whole entire portfolio. So send it out to other people. Send it to friends that you know are super nitpicky and will notice typos. I think as someone who's done hiring, that is something that would bother me the most, because to me it would just mean that someone isn't paying attention. And so like write well in your portfolio, have clear images in your portfolio, explain your process well. Those are some of the key things about the portfolio. And I think express your fit. So when you're doing all that soul searching to figure out like what kind of job you really want and like what kind of industry and what's your story, include that in your portfolio. Include your story, that what's your background and how you found your way into UX, and where you think you would fit well, because like a super generic portfolio isn't that helpful to someone looking at it. They want to see that you're going to fit in with what the company's all about. And so a little bit about you is nice to see, and then yeah, just like attention to detail on there.
Suzy, you want to go next?
Sure. Sorry about that. I keep losing connection. I think, are everyone has a different take on portfolios. I've definitely gone through my fair share of portfolios when looking to hire, and also observed people going through portfolios and really kind of, understanding your audience. So there's the portfolio piece, your online portfolio, which is different from your slide decks that you might provide once you've kind of gotten past that round of interviews where you have a more opportunity to do a deeper dive of your process. With the online portfolios, it tends to be hiring managers, people who may not necessarily be designers. So they just really kind of want a quick snapshot of just the types of work that you've involved yourself in, what things you can do. I think it's really important in your portfolio to have them try to be distinctly different from each other. So the case studies don't look like cookie cutter approaches with the same types of process. I think that is, it could do you a lot of harm because it's implying that UX is a standard process when it's not. You're throwing curveballs, and there's just different project requirements, and they want to see that you can strategize and think quickly on your feet, telling that compelling story that I was saying earlier in a concise way, and really guiding someone through your process, and explaining the why you did what you did, and what you learned, rather than just going through process. So de-emphasizing process and more about why you chose this approach and what you can speak about it. So you're only highlighting the things that you can speak to that actually gave you specific insights that let you go from point A to B to C. So you're not just kind of putting deliverables and writing, basically explaining what UX is and what an empathy map is, what an affinity map is. We want to be able to showcase and tell the person reading your case study why this is important to solve for. So really kind of showcasing your critical thinking skills, and within each project or case study, perhaps highlighting, this is where I, really focused on the visual side or the branding side. And then, so for instance, Capstone 2 is perfect for that because you're adding a feature to an existing brand. They want to know that you can stay on brand with language, tone, interaction, look, feel, whereas another capstone might lend itself more to perhaps the research side or more of a generalist side. So really kind of taking each case study or capstone, whatever you try to put in your portfolio, and speaking uniquely to what was interesting about that project.
Yeah, to add on to Suzy's point of like the why, I think you always have to explain the process of like, why did you do this? Why did you do that? And how did it lead to the next part? I think one thing that I often see, and this is a mistake I made a lot in the beginning as well, was just like, here's my research. Here's why research is important. Here's why I chose, like, competitive research is important because ABC, right? It's like, yeah, like most likely your audience knows why competitive research is important, but talk about why it mattered. And tell me what you learned, and then like from this information, how did you do the next step, right? And a lot of it is just you have to be adaptable. Like there's just in real life, like you may be doing like bits and pieces of things that are kind of out of order. So you want to be able to show your flexibility there. It's not just like, oh, like, but we have to do this. It's like, no, we don't have time. Like you can only do certain things. One thing I had another one I thought of, I just totally forgot. I blanked my mind. If it comes back to me, I'll bring it up again. But storytelling, make sure like think of it like a story, like a kid's book, like a children's book, like a picture book. Like the text is the most important thing. Like I think oftentimes we think like UX design is like, oh, like let's just make things really pretty. UX is not just about making things very pretty. UX is about making things functional. Like let's make it work. There's a reasoning behind it. Like the text itself should tell the whole portfolio, like your whole case study of like why it matters or like what you'd learn and what you did. The pictures are supplemental. It helps you guide the story. It helps like kind of like not add picture, it is a picture, but it adds like, kind of like it adds detail. It can explain like here's the iteration it made. And then here's the iteration, like here's like the original, and here's the changes I made. Here's why I made the changes, and here's the impact it had. So that's a really good thing to do. I came back to me. So if you have kind of an idea like what you want to pursue in terms of like UX, like if you want to go into product design, for example, right? So like like talk about business goals, talk about how you're measuring success, what does it mean for the business side, how do you communicate this with other teams? Like even if it isn't a real scenario, just talk about it. Like it's just like, this is how I position it to my team. Like this is what we intended for this group of people. Like if you kind of frame it that way, it's just makes it easier for them to understand, like, all right, this is how you position things. The last thing I want to bring up as well is the case study isn't always just all the highlights and all the wins. Talk about the places where it didn't work out. Like it's okay. Like those things that happen. Like UX is not a perfect thing where it's like, I know exactly, like I plug in some stuff, I will have the exact equation every single time. Oftentimes you kind of go back to drawing board again and again, and that's okay. Talk about those things. Like, where did you iterate? Where did things not go as you thought? Like you had this scenario in mind or hypothesis when doing research, but it didn't pan out that way. People actually thought a different way. I want to hear about that. Like, I want to hear about all the things you learned, not just like, show me your cool wins and all the fun things that like, oh, like that make you look outstanding. Like, show me like that you are a human. Show me that like you can adapt to problems where things don't go well. Like, to me, that is a sign of a much stronger UX designer than someone who only shows me the perfect like outside shell and no imperfections. Because that's not most likely you're never gonna go through that kind of situation. So, but while saying that, don't spend the whole case studies talking about all your failures. Like, it should celebrate success, right? It should celebrate your win. But it's okay to acknowledge where it didn't go right. Like, you lost this battle, but the war's not over. Like, there's still a lot to do. Like, show me everything.
Yeah, and I would have to agree on that note with Jay and that arc of a story where you're kind of presenting. That's actually, you can turn those constraints or any of those challenges into something really interesting, because every project is going to have constraints, whether it's budgetary, timeline, stakeholder involvement, being just super involved. You can tell that story because that's a real life story. If you're working, of course, on a project that's fictitious, ask your mentor to put some constraints in there for you. And I want to be able to see, that's more interesting to me, reading a case study, those constraints, and how you're able to solve for that with divergent ideas, with brainstorming, with all of the tools that are at your disposal. And I want to see how you're thinking as I'm throwing curveballs at you. So that can also be the story in itself.
100%. Okay, we're diving into interviews now. So can you talk about your first interview experience, or one of your first ones, and what you learned from them? And I've also been reading in the win section that people are given tests. What kind of tests are typically given during interviews?
Making me really relive my first interview again. My first interview is awful, to be honest. Like, I think it was like, to be honest, it was just like, I just applied to a place and tried it out, but really like it kind of woke me up a little bit. It's like, hey, like you're not the profession, like you're not in the same profession anymore. Like, you kind of have to kind of relearn some skills. You kind of have to kind of rethink how you approach things, right? Like, it's thinking about more of a product perspective or like a user perspective versus like just always like, oh, here's the process I did. Let me show you my 6-step process that I learned, right? It's just more like, okay, like show me adaptation, show me how you are able to act in a certain situation and think about that. So what I learned from that is just like to really just keep practicing and like keep studying and like just, practice interviews with other people and like just bounce questions off each other constantly, and it make you more confident. I think, I think one thing that I made a mistake in the first interview is I kept apologizing and I kept feeling like, I'm still learning. I still have a lot to do. I'm still learning the field. I spent too much time focusing on that versus what I could offer. And the other interviews where I talked about like, hey, like, despite being a newer designer, here's all these awesome skills that I have that can really contribute to helping the company grow or do whatever. That made me stand out so much more, just because like I wasn't like down on myself. I was just like very confident. I was like, this is what I can do for you. And like, let me show you how awesome it is.
I was remembering it was a phone interview. And I think this kind of goes back to, it wasn't the same company as the other one, but it does go back to like assessing fit. And I saw someone wrote in the chat there too, like it's a two-way street, you're interviewing them too. And I think as like switching fields, it was hard for me to know what I was assessing and like what kinds of questions to ask that would be helpful and would actually like get me information. But that interview, it wasn't great because I didn't get a good sense that I would also, like, it was another place where I just thought like they're not really focused on what UX design is. But I was so new to UX design, I was like, well, who am I to say like what UX design is? But this doesn't sound like it. And again, it kind of goes to Emily, what you're talking about like different regions, different cities, you know, might just be in different places in their, you know, the way that companies approach UX, UI, product design. And this company, you know, they knew they wanted UX design, but I don't think they knew much about it at all. And so they ended up actually going with someone else, which was a relief, which is fine. They went with someone who was like more of a visual designer than I am. And I mean, that was a good thing in the long run. When I finally like did interview at the company that I started working with first, it felt so different. And so like the interview was immediately different. Like I talked to the team and I was like, yes, I want to work with those people. Like they have the kind of energy that I want. Like they're thinking in the way that I'm thinking. I'm not trying to like make them see what design is. Like they kind of already get it. And they also valued all of the experience I brought to the table in terms of research, in terms of teaching and art background and all of those things that it was a two-way street. And it just, that feeling in the interview went so much better. The conversation was better. And so, yeah, my first interview was pretty disappointing. It was just disappointing.
I can't really remember my first interview, but I know generally within that haze of interviews, and a lot of interviews had, that you get better. And the first one is always hard, and the first few ones are always hard, and you just get better over time as you start to do it and you get more confident. So I would encourage people to just start interviewing, even if you're not ready to actually accept a job, just for practice. And also do mock interviews with friends, maybe find friends or people who, your friends who have a network of people who might be hiring managers, especially if you have friends who are in the design world and could do mock interviews with you. I would just encourage you to practice that earlier on in the game, because it's hard, and it just gets better and better as you get more comfortable. I have found that it generally goes by a few rounds. So the first round would normally be with like an HR person or someone who's not a designer really. And again, assessing fit. So it's a conversation. And I think with all the rounds that you go through, you want to treat it like a conversation. You want to let them know that you're human and personalize it. You know, this is what I'm excited about in design. This is where I'm coming from. This is why I'm getting into design. These are the things about design that really excite me. They really want to see the enthusiasm. They also want to know if you're a good fit for the company. So if you are applying for a job and interviewing and you land an interview with a company that you really don't care for, there were definitely interviews that I had. I didn't really care about the company. I was just trying to get, you know, get that practice in. It's very abundantly clear to both parties when you're not really that interested in what they're doing. So the excitement really comes through for design, but also why you're interested in that company. So just treating it like a conversation and exploration, and just trying to assess whether you even want to work at that company. So talking about team structure, talking about the design team as they know it from the hiring manager's point of view, those are always really good conversations. So as I said, as you practice, you're just going to be more confident, and that confidence really shows. That's real. You have to build that confidence, and I think that is, you know, eventually what ends up really those people like a hiring manager or a designer and a design team giving you that chance. Is when they can kind of see that confidence shine through and that like passion for the design and the company come through.
Absolutely. Okay.
And I guess there was a question about like the test in the interview.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the design challenge
or whiteboard
piece
challenge,
of it,
probably?
or whiteboarding. I don't know if we want to talk about that at all, but yeah, that there's varying opinions on whether or not that's a good thing. I do personally use them when I'm hiring, but we do them in a way that I think is very fair and helps to give also the interviewee a sense of what it would be like to work with us as a team. My team is amazing. We're really kind and inquisitive and we're team players. And so I think it really gives an opportunity for us to see how someone would think about a problem and would, we were working, the option to work remotely existed prior to the pandemic. So I really wanted to see how someone was going to work remotely doing design, and that's not always easy and not everyone's comfortable, like, share your screen, show me your design process. But I really needed to know that the designer we were hiring was going to be able to do that, and also that they could get a sense of like what we're like to work with. So it was like our actual product team, and we, go through and solve a problem together. And so we do use them. And I did also do a design challenge just in one of the interviews, the first job I ended up taking. And it was also a very positive experience. So that might be the design test part of it. Less of a test, more of like a hybrid of collaboration, hybrid of performance art in doing a whiteboard challenge.
So I actually never had to do a whiteboard challenge or a design challenge. I was surprised about that. I was prepared to do so. I was in fact in a Designlab whiteboard challenge or design challenge group that we would meet occasionally and do exercises, whether in person or through Zoom. I use that product design challenge book. Do you guys know it? It's a thin book. I'll try to find a link, but I think that's a good resource. I think that companies do tend to use it. I think at my company, we toyed around with the idea of using it or not. And I think in a lot of ways, you should be aware that some companies don't do those challenges in an ethical way. So, they might be asking you to like work on a problem that they're already working on or a similar product. And just be aware. I think you can get those feelers, that spidey sense of whether something's fishy or off. Like, am I just doing free work, or if they actually want to assess. I have mixed feelings about whiteboard challenges, so I'm actually curious to hear maybe at another time how Lara does this at her company. But yeah, like I said, we've toyed around with the idea, but I really do think that in your conversations with the team when you're in an interview, but also how you present what you're presenting, whether through your, usually it's actually when you get past the hiring manager, you actually present slides of a specific case study, perhaps 2 case studies. That process of showing your approach and how you were able to solve for specific challenges will tell you a lot about you as a designer. And I think that's the main reason why we didn't really do design challenges, because if you can have a designer who can effectively walk you through their process and you're asking questions along the way, that can also replace, at least for us, it felt like it replaced the need for a design challenge. So yeah.
For me, I actually never did a whiteboard challenge, but I ended up, I did do an app review challenge, so which I actually kind of found that pretty common. So an app review challenge is basically like, oh, show me like what's an app that you like to use, or like what's an app that you really like, or like how can you improve it, or what could be improved about it, right? So I think Adrian Smart actually just did an episode about this yesterday. I watched it. It was really cool. But the idea, it's like as a UX designer, you're always looking at products from like a UX lens, right? You're not just looking at like, oh, like this is cool, like that's it, right? It's always like you're looking at it and it's like, all right, what do I like about it? What do I not like about it? And it keeps you on your feet a little bit, and it shows that you're constantly trying to learn stuff. But like Suzy brought up before, it's always about process. It's always about like, how do you approach it? Like it's not to say like you have to follow these 6 steps, but it's more like if you were to tackle this challenge, what are the steps you would take to learn about the audience, how you would approach the market, how would you design it, whatever, right? Like it's just kind of all about those things. Like all these challenges have a common thread, and that thread is to learn about how you as a designer think. Like, how do you approach a problem and how do you solve for it? Like, who do you work with? Do you work with people? Like, how do you do collaboration? And so really, like, when you are doing these challenges, like, talk out loud constantly. It's just say what's on your mind, say how you approach it. If you kind of silently do it and it's like, oh, cool, I have the answer, they're not going to care, because you just gave them an answer doesn't mean anything to them because they don't know how you got there. So like, kind of like, pretend you're back in like elementary school doing math, show your work, show everything you did. Like, why did you do this? That'll make more sense to them.
I was actually gonna say that exact same thing. Like, think about like when they're like, show your work. You're like, but why? It's such a waste of time. It's not a waste of time, promise. Okay, so we're gonna do a little bit lightning round, but I guess that we're gonna combine some questions too. So Campbell and May are asking pretty much, since we all went through UXA, what advice would we give for those who are just starting or still in the program to make the most of the UXA experience, the mentorship and projects?
I think mine relates to something that Jay said that I think is really important, and that's focus on it. Like, you signed up for a reason, and so like make it a focus, you know, like make design part of like what you're doing all the time, and just really like throw yourself into it, because I think otherwise if it's like a side thing, like a thing you just like do sometimes, I don't think you'd get the most out of it. But and that's not really what I've seen from like students that I have in my crits. They all, you know, are really progressing through their projects, and I can really tell that that's what they're really diving into. And so I also just think it makes it more fun. This is not something you have to do. It's something that you want to do. So I think to get the most out of it, like really just dive in and explore other areas where you might want to learn more. Like Designlab is going to introduce you to a lot, and the curriculum's changed a lot even since I did it. But there's always things that are not, everything can't be part of the curriculum. So if there's something that like really seems interesting to you, go and like learn more about that, because that might be something that you didn't realize you're really good at, or an area you might want to focus on.
I would say, because it's an online course, really take advantage of talking to other people when you can. So, you know, you're primarily talking to your mentor and then later with your career coach. If you attend the same crit sessions, try to connect with those people, kind of have a regular cadence of like a group. I think talking to other students about their experiences, whether it be former students or current students, just to understand what their experience is like, since we're all assigned different mentors and different career coaches. Obviously, there's like a talented roster of mentors and career coaches, but based off of what you need, identifying, you know, your strengths and weaknesses and what you want to improve upon, you might want to have a specific type of mentor. So understanding those things were really helpful for me, and just talking to other students, identifying the students who live near me. So whenever I do group crits, I ask people to state not only their name, but where they're located, so that you can make a mental note like, hey, they're also in San Francisco. Hey, they're also in Oakland. And just being more proactive about meeting with a regular group of people, whether it be in those informal sessions, like in your crits, and you've identified those people, or taking it to the Designlab location-specific channels. I also hear from students, oh, well, that's, you know, my channel, my location isn't super active. It's like, you make it active. The people in those channels are who makes it active. So if you're feeling like you wish there was more activity, try to organize events. Like I said, we would do design challenge events, or just hanging out events, or let's review portfolios together and, you know, practice how to present events. So really taking advantage of that community, since it is an online curriculum, just really talking to your peers, former students, and creating that network, I think is huge. Oh, another thing I wanted to say is familiarizing yourself with a capstone. So this is also a thing, just talking to other students or people who have done capstones, like what are the things that helped you along the way? What is it that you wish you knew? Every capstone focuses on a particular piece of design. So familiarizing yourself with the capstones in advance and how you might conceptualize or strategize how you would approach something like that.
So yeah, well, echo Suzy's sentiment about like networking within like Designlab as well. Like for me, when I started with full time, I found 3 other people in the same program as me in my cohort who I became really, really good friends with. Like we started a group. I talked to them every day. We were each other's sounding board constantly. Every question we had, we would kind of be the first person to go to. That way, it's like, you know, you're not doing this alone. Like you have a lot of people in your cohort who are whether part time or full time as well. Like use them as a resource, talk to them, get to know them, and like they can be really great people to learn from. like the people that I end up in a group with, we all live in different places. Like one person lives in LA, another person in Austin. Two of us now are in New York, but the other one was in Florida at first. But like the fact that we're all spread apart, but still able to kind of communicate constantly, I think really speaks like, I mean, I guess now we're all home, but like, back then it's like even just like being remote and like being able to talk to each other, like they were like kind of like the people I always relied on in terms of like practicing interviews, practicing like the like whiteboarding challenges. Like it's just like to be able to work together just makes it just a much more fun course. Another thing I would add to just for the capstones, like if you can, like, so you have the option of doing like a Designlab project or an independent project. For me, like independent projects always been kind of fun because you can do something you're passionate about. So, like when you're talking about a project to like recruiters and like to employers, like they want to see passion. And if you want to talk about things you're passionate about. So if you like, I think the design projects are awesome. Like they're really good stuff. But if you have stuff that you're really passionate about as well, that you really want to pursue, like for me, I love video games. So my capstone too, I did video games. I did Twitch because like, oh, like that's so cool. And for me, that became my selling point for my case, like for my portfolio. Like every interview, I always talk about that because I was so excited about it. And as a result, I made other people very excited about it. And it's just like, like kind of nerding out about like things that are passionate about, right? So that's like the best thing about an interview. Like I think, we talk a lot about skills, like learning all this stuff. Like, yes, it's good to have it like you need to have your foundations, you need to know how to do things. But at the end of the day, they are looking for people they want to work with, people that are excited to like to be in the trenches with, right? Like it's you can teach somebody skills, but you can't teach someone not to be a jerk, right? So you want to be a good person. You want to be like, but like you want to be a good person. You want to show you're excited. You want to show you're passionate. You want to learn, and I think that will really go a long way. Like that energy, that excitement is what makes you a great designer. Like it separates good and great.
Absolutely. Okay. So Joanne is asking a question, and I think I may word it a little bit differently because at least not to my knowledge, like I don't believe I know that there are universities and stuff now that are actually starting up their own UI UX like major in college, but I feel like for the most part it's not highly prevalent yet. So Joanne's original question is, do you find your skill set to be relatively on par with other designers with university program UI UX experience, or any differences? I feel like I want to reword this, and this is a more common question that's asked. Do we feel that UXA prepared us with the skills that are on par, that's kind of required for the design world, like the jobs out there?
I think from what I've seen from some like university programs is there's still more of a focus on engineering, the engineering side of things. It's not to say that there are some programs that are like expanding into like design, and that's great for like students who are in college now, and who are doing programs now. But design does draw on so many skill sets that you don't need a degree in like human-centered design to do UX design well. But from what I have seen about some of the programs, it's like the engineering side of it is a little bit more emphasized. And so I think I always encourage the students in the group crits too, as like one of those like extra skills to learn some basic HTML and CSS. That is going to help you a lot. Even if you don't code, you can talk to engineers better. You can use inspect better. And so that's something that's like a good add-on to do, or like do a small course on that in addition to doing Designlab. I definitely felt prepared to work as a designer after I finished Designlab, to answer that question specifically.
Any other thoughts?
There's always a boot camp versus university program, and I think that there's pros and cons to both. But one thing that I will say with a boot camp is because there's more frequent cohorts, so there's more cycles versus in a university setting where they.
Oh no.
Nope.
We lost
Freeze.
you. Yeah. You want to fill in the gaps?
No, I don't really know what you're talking about.
I guess I can jump in. So earlier this year, I actually interviewed someone from Stanford who has a degree in product design, and I was actually, and it has nothing to do with Stanford. It's just I actually dove into the curriculum for the major, and it's actually it's very close to what Lara was saying, how it's a little bit more engineering focused, but also all the courses that made up the major, lower div and upper div, they were all intro to classes. They're all intro to product design, intro to this. So none of the curriculum that was built for the Stanford major, it did not, I at least felt like it did not go as much in depth as Designlab does, or even just boot camps do. And I think like similar to like what Suzy was saying earlier, like in a boot camp, this is the only thing you're going to be learning. You're not going to have to do general ed classes. You're not going to do all these filler classes. Like this is all you're going to be learning. So at least from my experience and having done hiring and interviewing, I think that universities have not figured out exactly like, you know, what UX design is. They don't really know like what it entails and how deep you have to go. So I actually think that I feel so much more prepared. I didn't hire that person because during the interview, I wanted her to dive deeper into how she did things, but she couldn't tell me that. She only told me what she learned and how to hypothetically apply something, but she couldn't actually give me examples of how she actually did it. So that's why she didn't get the job. So that's my take on it.
Yeah.
Right.
For me, like
go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, for me, I felt relatively prepared. Like coming out, I think a lot of it's, you know, there's always more to learn. There's always more to do. So always just like keep challenging yourself. Like just because you finish a course, like doesn't mean like stop learning, right? Like there's always more to like kind of keep doing. But yeah, I think I felt pretty good. And I think in terms of like the other designer that at my company, like honestly, like something we mentioned before is like really focus on your strengths. Like if you have a strength somewhere, like from a previous background, use that to your full advantage. Don't like rely on it. Like for me, I'm really good at like I have a business background and like I understand the sales side of things. So oftentimes like I will kind of be like the person leading that discussion in like in terms of product design, right? It's like, all right, like if we're building something out for the sales team, this is how I think it's gonna be really helpful. Learn their pitch, you know, sit down with the sales team, understand how they're pitching it and like how I would pitch it, and then build a product around that. And I think those, you know, use those strengths to your advantage, like, and that'll really help separate you against like just someone doing a 4-year degree.
Yep, for sure. Lara, did you want to add anything before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that they're also different. You know, like going to college to get a degree is different than also maybe deciding, you know, I want a career in this. Like I want to like do UX design, so I'm gonna like specialize for this period of time and like really learn more about this particular field. You know, it's kind of like I think. I mean, I used to be in academia, so obviously biased because I do think that like there's a lot of value in a college degree because it teaches you so many different things. But in comparing, like, can you be a UX designer without a degree in like product or UX design or human-centered design? Yes, I definitely think so. But I also think like if, you know, we also had students who like just finished college and then they do UX Academy, and I mean, it's pretty cool too, to see them like specialize in a specific area because they realize like they really want to deep dive and like do some specific projects.
Totally. Okay. We actually have 2 questions that are related, but it's basically about the designer and developer relationship and how that handoff looks like. So we only have a few more minutes left, but anything you'd like to share about what that relationship looks like or anything to keep in mind about that relationship?
You have to work together, basically. So like learn to communicate and use all of your design research skills to communicate better. So ask questions, learn some basic code, learn how to use inspect, ask what would make it easier to communicate. And I really like when it's also not just like a strict like handoff, like you like email them some files and say like good luck. But when you can actually have a conversation about like what's the goal, what's the problem we're trying to solve here, this is what I'm thinking, and if there's any opportunity to collaborate, that usually ends up with a better solution in the long run. But developers are awesome to work with. I mean, I'm not an engineer, and so I really appreciate their skills and what they bring to the table.
Developers are your best friends. Like really be their friends. Like if they like you, they will do more for you. They will like, okay, like, oh, we can make this work. If they don't like you, they'll be like, no, we can't do this. Sorry about that. Can you find an easy solution? That's a harsh truth. But I mean, like you try to be friends with everybody. Don't just be selective with your friends. But I think it's just like really like, you know, establishing a good like relationship, understanding like what works, how they work, and kind of what like how they want to receive the files or what is the best way for them to work. I think, you know, like that's going to be really helpful just as you kind of build that relationship together. One thing also, just like really be really detailed with your notes in your design. Like you show them the design, it may just be like the default state. Like there's hover states, there's active states, there's a bunch of other different states that you need to think about. What's clickable, what's not. Like most of the times those will be defined in your UI kits. But if they're not, just be very clear, very like, point draw little arrows, little boxes of like, this is kind of how I'm imagining it go. Here's the animation. This is what I'm like, this kind of copy we go here. Just take a lot of notes in your design and just make it really easy to hand off. Like imagining, like I guess like put yourself in the position of a developer, right? If another designer were to hand you this like sketch file or this Figma file of like, here's my design, build it now. And it's kind of like, this doesn't make any sense. That's probably what it's going to be like to them. So you want to make it as easy a transition as possible. Like it's a little bit of extra work on your end, but really it helps you like check your work and make sure that you're kind of building the best user experience.
I will also add that developers actually think very similarly to UX designers, especially when you are thinking about the flow. It's just that for them, it is a little bit more black and white versus us. We have to actually think about all the different ways that a certain interaction could go. And that's where you come in and then actually be able to communicate that with each other. So yeah, that's all I wanted to add. But before I move on, Suzy, anything you want to add about working with developers or anything about handoff? Any just tips, quick tips that anyone should know?
Well, I would just say sitting side by side if you can, or just on a call with them and just talking them through your process. I found that every developer I've worked with has different needs. So sometimes I assume specific annotations that I've done for a developer would also benefit another developer, and that's not necessarily the case. So just talking with them and understanding what proper handoff they're expecting, or maybe being able to just talk and work or co-design side by side with them is also helpful. I've also worked with developers who are not so they're in India. So that provides another set of challenges in terms of just even time zone and communications. So it really, I would say my experience working with developers has been across the board very, very different. And my advice would be to just talk to them about the best way to collaborate together.
And this is a quick question for Suzy. What is your cat's name?
His name is Chevy.
Awesome. So Joanne, name is Chevy. Awesome. So we're going to do 2 more questions and then we should be done. So this is kind of related. So especially for folks who are just starting out the program or maybe done and, on their way to becoming a UX designer, any just other tips or just sources of like networking, like Slack spaces, anything that you can think of that people should check out? And then also specifically now that we're in a pandemic, how do we feel, like how like advice about navigating that challenge in terms of networking and also job hunting? I feel like everything that we've said here is like just talk, just communicate, be open, right? Like be open to networking. Don't be shy. Like honestly, like don't be shy. And so for me, like I was never a Twitter user and I really only started using Twitter because of Designlab, doing more of the posts and stuff. But like honestly, now that I've been on there more and I have started seeing so many more like people from the UX space, just design in general, engineers, like people are actually very willing to talk. Like they don't care if they know you or if there's like a connection. They just want to know that that you can have a decent human conversation. So yeah.
I would say, I feel like a lot's been said already in just terms of networking, but outside of just purely networking and also just interesting conversations, there's Facebook groups. So one in particular that I am a part of is called Design Guild, and that is you have to be invited. You can easily get an invite from another fellow designer, so just let me know. But there's the Facebook Designers Guild, where they heavily monitor the types of posts. So it's educational and it's supposed to provide value to everyone who's in the group. And then they have subgroups where it's like design, women of color, Designers Guild, and I think there's a Designers Guild for Justice. So they have offshoot groups, and you can really kind of make connections with people who are really aligned with the things that you're passionate about in terms of design. And there's a lot of mentorships, like Hexagon Mentorship. They have chapters in several cities, and that's something that comes to mind. Yeah.
I was going to mention Hexagon as well. And I went, when I was living in Denver, went to a few of the in-person events, which were good. This is another Denver-based one, Denver UX, if anyone happens to be in Denver. Really awesome group. And then I saw someone posted there in the chat about meetup groups. And so actually the great thing about things right now is that like you don't have to be like in Denver to go to like meetup in Denver. So if that's like a group that is having a meetup, you could just attend it because a lot of groups are doing things online. So I like those a lot. Envision has a lot of really good webinars too. I just went to one on remote hiring. And I thought it was really good, not just for like the actual like hiring process, but like hearing about, I thought it had a lot of good advice for what to do, like if you were the person interviewing, right? Because there was a bunch of hiring managers talking about hiring, how they're hiring remotely. So I think those webinars are really good to attend as well. Yeah, I'm just looking for like, it sometimes might take a little while to find the right fit for you, right? Find the right Slack group, find the right meetup group that suits with your personality or where you might like meet a few people. But you don't need like hundreds of people to be connected to necessarily. Like getting a few good people that you do talk to, and that can also be good, or having like one or two groups that you really find their content just like really speaks to you is good. But it might take a few tries to find the right one.
A random one I would say also is developer meetups. So developer meetups is often a lot of developers, but it's an opportunity for you to kind of jump in and work on a project. Like oftentimes they're not really thinking about design, not thinking about the UX, but like, hey, walks in the UX designer. You can opportunity to kind of hop in and talk to them, learn a little bit, one, about how their work style, how they work with UX designers, and two, it's an opportunity to kind of work with them. I think that's like a really good way to kind of get your foot in the door as well. It's not always just talking to only designers, like talking to other people in the field, like in the industry that will be working with designers is also going to be really important as well. And also just like really like go in with the with the mindset of like you want to learn. Like I think oftentimes what can happen, and this kind of ties into the question of like, you know, like the UX being saturated, like, you know, bootcamp people, like, oh, they're taking all over the place. They're everywhere, right? Like I think one of the things is like, you know, like some people like will take a boot camp and like act like they know everything about UX. That's not true at all. Like you have a good base, or you have like information, but it's still has to learn, and it's still like keeping an open mind and listening and be able to like to take feedback and like learn and grow from it is going to be really important. Like show that you are willing to learn. Like if you make a mistake, if you know like if you're not doing something, like a lot of the designers, it's okay. Like this is an opportunity for you to like to learn and to be a better designer. Like even now, I'm still learning a lot of stuff. I'm still making a lot of mistakes, but I'm like it's just kind of like I want to grow. I want to be better. And I think having that mentality, having that mindset, is going to be really helpful. Like you don't want to go in like acting like you know everything, because no one's going to want to talk to you then. Like go in asking like I want to learn. Like I want to learn from your experiences. How can I be better? Like what can I do to like, you know, what are some skills I can learn? What are some traits I can have? That's good. Those are good things to have as a designer as well.
I also want to echo, because Jay, you brought this up, working with developers. There's, you know, Code for America has chapters all over the country, and I participated in my local Code for America sub-chapter, which is, you know, I was really interested in civics work and working and designing for my community. And when I went there, I was surprised to find that I was one of 2 designers there. So they really were so excited to have designers, and I had the opportunity to work with developers, which is something that, you know, you don't necessarily get to do actively in Designlab through the course. So if you're looking to work on real actual projects that are focused on the community and the betterment of the community, and also get that firsthand experience working with a dev team, look at Code for America chapters and other city sub-chapters where you live.
Awesome. All right, we are at time, and there were a few questions that we didn't get to. I'm so sorry. For those who are part of UXA, feel free to toss those questions in the Slack. We'll get them answered there. And if you are not part of UXA but would like a question answered, this video will actually be uploaded to YouTube. So feel free to post a comment on the video, and then we'll get that answered there as well. But before we head off, any final words of wisdom? It's like a loaded question. Mine is like, I think it always just goes back to imposter syndrome, but like, don't doubt yourself too much. Like seriously, like don't doubt yourself too much. Be open to feedback, be open to collaboration. There will be times where you know that you are right. Not that you might be right, you are right. Like like there will be times that you know it, but unfortunately there's just good, you have to work with a lot of people in this industry, a lot of different type of people who come with very different mindsets, different perspectives and all of that. So having the biggest open mind possible will, I think, make you the most successful in this industry. Anything else?
I'd say echoing also, but really just knowing your true worth and value, being confident in the foundation of what you've learned about UX. I have to say that a lot of the students in my group crits have a stronger foundation of UX than a lot of the designers that I work with now. So keep that in mind, and be scrappy, be resourceful, work with what you have, be transparent about that you're working with what you have. I think people like to see that energy and that excitement and enthusiasm, and really spend time thinking about what excites you, why you're in design, develop those critical thinking skills, really use your group crits to talk about your design, to be able to defend your design, to be able to pitch your design, to be able to talk about design, and also as a place to question and give that critique to your fellow colleagues, your fellow peers. So take advantage of those group opportunities that Designlab does provide, because those are things that you're going to be having to do every single day.
Let's see, any like last things that maybe I haven't touched on. Well, let's touch on maybe a little bit, but like communication is really important. Written communication. I do so much writing in my job every single day. We're a small team. We don't have like a UX writer or content writer or something. I do all the writing also. So it's really important for how you might actually do writing in your application that you might be working on, because there isn't anybody else to do it, and you might be the best person for that because you know the user the best. And then also it's really important to be able to communicate, which could mean talking to somebody, but also written communication is really important for day-to-day work, especially in a remote environment, which most people are in right now. And Designlab does provide a lot of good opportunities for that through the Slack channel, and then through the group crits, being able to talk about your design and talk about yourself. And I guess one thing that's particularly relevant to this time is that Designlab offers the best opportunities to show that you know how to work remotely. And a lot of other people might struggle with like showing that. And I think that anyone doing Designlab can say like, yep, I absolutely can work remotely. And I have participated in group crits remotely. I present my work remotely. I, collaborate remotely. And so I think that is another one of those past experiences that you can bring into any of the conversations that you're having with jobs. So I think that's really important right now.
I will say one thing that isn't super design focused, but ignore the haters. Haters gonna hate. Like people are gonna get mad at you. People are gonna like complain about boot camps and whatnot. But dude, like let that drive you. Let that motivate you. Show them what you're worth. Like I think the fact that it's the fact that you are like looking to pursue something that you're more passionate about is already a huge step. You're not just falling into it because you just kind of like, oh, I just kind of fell into this job, but you're doing it because you really want to. Like use that motivation, use that that drive, that passion to really like fuel your focus for UX design. And like I mentioned before, UX is an awesome field. It's so fun. It's really exciting. Like there's a lot of really cool things, and it's not a field that'll go away. If anything, it's really important now through COVID. Like we've realized how important good user experience is. There's a lot of really bad websites out there. There's a lot of really bad programs and services out there that won't function well without you. So, like at times it'd be tough right now, but I think at the end of the day, like you are in a really good position to kind of move forward and be like and pursue something that hopefully you'll be passionate about as passionate as I am. I think really just it's exciting. It's an exciting place to be, and like use that as motivation, and like you use their haters like tears to drive you even more, right? So that's it. Not super professional saying, like not super professional sounding, but for me, like I've always found motivation is what will push you forward, and like motivate yourself because you want something different, you want something better, and because you just want to prove some people wrong.
My favorite part, proving people wrong. All right, cool. So we are done. Thank you to my team so much for being here, answering all the questions, and thank you to everyone who actually joined us this evening. Especially if you are not on the West Coast, it's not 7 o'clock for you. It's probably much later. So thank you so much. Like I said, this will be uploaded to YouTube. If you are not part of the community, feel free to drop questions there. If you are part of UXA, then I'm going to throw this in our Slack channel. But either way, thank you everyone so much for being here, and I hope everyone stays safe, stay well, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.